What's up guys, back with another training log in Q&A. Brief recap of this week, all of the big three went well, as did the rest of my training. I said I wanted to squat less like a pussy this week, more confident and faster, and I did to a degree. There's still room for more, but solid. I've been adding 5 kilos per week on squats and deadlifts on my top singles, and each week now for 5 weeks has felt better, so that's good. Got good momentum right now, like I mentioned in my last video. Now, as you can tell from the title, thumbnail, and picture of my program, I did OHP this week for the first time. Now, OHP I think has gotten a bit of a bad rap in modern powerlifting, mainly in IPF and USAPL circles. The idea being we should take the fatigue from it and save it for bench work. I do think the fatigue is a valid concern, but to write it off altogether I think is a bit of an overreaction in the wrong direction. I mentioned in my recent video how the anterior deltoids aren't activated until we hit more maximal weights in the bench press, but most powerlifting work is done below this point. That means it can be good to target them with some isolation work so we can strengthen them for when we do actually max out. Now back to the fatigue thing, I've had some shoulder issues on and off for years now. That led me to focus on bench first and foremost in terms of load management. But I've had no shoulder issues for a while now, so I'm trying to gently reintroduce OHP. I went for 155 pounds for 2x6 as you'll see. Now my best is 175 pounds for 5 reps. So pretty good strength considering I haven't done it in years. And if you ignore the fact that my old PR was from when I was about 50 pounds lighter. So I did feel a bit of soreness in my shoulders the next day after doing the OHP. It was a rest day, but my later bench days in the week, I was just fine. So I think it was just some DOMs. Whenever you deal with pain and injury, it's good to stay calm like this. Pain can occur even without tissue damage due to psychosocial factors. I'll link below to a good article by Barbell Medicine on this. The point being, pain isn't just physical, it's also mental. You'll also note that on my positioning on deadlifts, I really strain my legs, which leads to a more hip flexion right before I pull. I get a good stretch in my posterior chain, and it really helps my pop off the floor this week. I've talked about this before, deadlifts don't have an eccentric to start the rep like squats and bench do, so you don't get some of that stretch reflex normally. However, with some motion before you pull, you can get stretch reflex. You can do this with a dynamic start like a grip and rip style if you look at somebody like John Hack, or just to do a little stretch like I do here. A hip pump right before you pull is another good strategy. So that's basically all I had to say about my training this week. Leave more questions down below, which brings me to the next part. Let's go over the Q&A portion of the video. So I got some questions on how I handle the frequency on bench. So one is my intensity is pretty submaximal. Most of the pushing is on isolation work. This is how I generally like to train for powerlifting. Do most of your volume work on your SBD. More submaximal to focus on skill practice and get hypertrophy from isolation work pushed to a higher intensity. Another thing I do, you can notice it if you look closely, is I alternate my grip width each day. So on my low rep days, I do fingers on the rings, max legal grip width, what I use in competition. On the medium rep days, I go about 1 finger width wider. And then on the highest rep day, I go 2 finger widths wider. This is a good way to prevent overuse injuries, just slightly different movement patterns. You can see with my close grip bench press, it's actually only about 2 finger widths narrower than my usual bench grip. That's something you can keep in mind with close or wide grip bench. You can do a big difference to work the different muscles, triceps on close grips for example, or this just slight difference just to reduce overuse a bit while still working essentially the same movement pattern. Now the next question I got is, what is a reasonable amount of weight to put on your maxes in 1 year? Now there's a good study on this. They looked at data from gym members and powerlifters from openpowerlifting.org, a website that posts basically every powerlifting meet result. And they found that the rate of gains basically halves. So say it took you 6 months to add 50 pounds to your squat. On average, it will take 12 months to add the next 50 pounds. Of course, there can be fluctuations. You may take lifting more seriously sometimes versus others. You could be cutting or bulking, etc. But as a general guideline, this will work well. Set reasonable expectations for yourself. Big goals are fine, but you can also set yourself up for disappointment. Your results are probably going to be best informed by what you have done in the past. Next question, why do I bench first? So a couple of reasons. One, generally speaking, I find there's less carryover fatigue doing bench first. There's less systemic fatigue from it versus squats and deadlifts. So for most people, I like to program this way. There's also some research linked below showing that exercises you do first in a session get better results for strength, assumably due to this systemic fatigue. So I think you can get the most net strength gains this way. And bench is also my worst lift, so I'm trying to focus on it first and foremost by doing it first in my sessions. I also find just the general motion of my arching actually works pretty well to warm up my hips for squats or deadlifts later. Next question, what is my daily step count like? So I get about 8,000 on average most days. Sundays, where I have to work the most, it brings down my average a bit. Like I mentioned last week, I do 10 minutes of cycling that day after my work. I find it makes me feel a lot better on my squats the following Mondays. Now, last question, what do I do for recovery? Well, the majority of recovery is going to just be getting enough protein, calories, and sleep. Next is stress management. This is often overlooked. There's a study linked below that found that high stress was associated with double the recovery time between sessions. Do something relaxing and make it a deliberate part of your schedule so you don't feel guilty about it either. This is big for me. Another one is light movement. Mentioned before how step count is associated with recovery between workouts in another video, link to that study below as well. Now, all these things probably cover 90% if not more of your potential recovery. The rest of these things, you have to ask yourself if the benefit is really worth the stress of doing it. Oftentimes these recovery modalities I see, even if there is some small theoretical benefit, require a lot of time, stress, and effort, which all take away from recovery. It's probably not worth any tiny reward you would get. Focus on the basics. Now, not just with recovery, but in general, people like to assume these tiny things make a big difference. It's because people, when you care about something deeply, are desperate for anything they think will make a big difference. And people also don't like uncertainty. They'd rather believe something makes a big difference without a lot of evidence rather than accept uncertainty or not knowing if something does work or not. So that's basically it, guys. Please like, comment more questions down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. And thanks for watching.